Let's talk about managing large lists, and then just the scale of our content as that evolves over time. It's a really it's not a huge deal, but it can be if you have especially one list that gets really really big. So you consider the scale of your content as soon as possible, so you can as that list grows, you can sort of just take that in stride, and that's part of your plan. Um, and there's a couple different ways to do this. One is you could just go with a single list. So sometimes you need to have everything in that same list. And but if it's going to be larger than like maybe 5K or 10K, depending on the nature of the content, you can decide if it makes sense to split that up into multiple lists. And if you do go with the multiple list sort of scenario, how will that work? I know with agility, you create the models separately from the content containers, so you can actually really easily just create another list using the same content model, and that list could have a logical separation from another list based on some kind of segmentation. A lot of times folks, if they have we've worked with like news organizations over the past where they have sometimes millions of articles that are going out, and they'll segment those based on a year. So here's the 2021 news, here's 2022, and now we're 2023 news. And so those, each one of those lists is still pretty big, but it means that the old stuff you don't have to worry about. You can fairly easily find old things, and once you get to the hundreds of thousands of items, it's much easier to just work with that number.
And a neat way to think about this, related back to the related content, is you could have a module on your news listing page that has a selection box where you can pick all the lists of content from the content area of which lists to bring the content in from. So you could say, oh, we're going to add 2023 article list, and then you go to your module and say, also pick 2023 articles. And so your system can be dynamic. So you don't need a developer to pull in a new list anymore. The system itself has that configuration information. And I've seen this a million times where people build a single list and they're just adding articles, adding things. Maybe they expand their team, they get investment, something happens, and they start adding more. So from maybe 1 to 2 articles a week, they add 1 or 2 a day. And this list just starts to balloon and balloon and balloon. And after like 5 to 10 years, this list is almost unmanageable. So you really have to look at the type of content model you're building. If you're looking at categories, it's very unlikely that's going to get huge. If you're looking at news items or blogs, that happens. It really does. Even press releases can get pretty significant. So you have to start looking at the type of content model you're building and think in your head, will this become a large list? Or is there even the chance of it? And then, try to plan ahead for that. And it's not that you can't go and change these models and add other lists and do things, but as Joel and I's passion for content architecture, the goal is really to not have to bring back developers at a later time. Now, you got to weigh the option of making a more complex content model with saying, you know what, at some point down the road, 5 years, we're going to have to relook at this list. Maybe that is a better decision. You have to make that balanced decision of, will we deal with the large list when it gets there, or do we want to deal with it now and just be ready so we don't have to bring in more development?
Yeah, and just to caveat that a little bit, John, we often work with customers for upwards of a decade or more, sometimes close to 2 decades for some customers that have been with us for a long time. So we've seen folks go through this cycle of how do you manage an instance that has close to 2 million items in it? What do we do with that? How do you make it easier for people to find things? Because that's just a lot of stuff to search through, and that's just something that can evolve with your content.
Yeah, and personalization, these other things tie into this too. So if you have personalized versions of content, then you take a large list of content and you have variations of that and all sorts of things you're trying to run. That list or that content can really balloon. And so how do you keep that and maintain the ease of use with that?